We don't give our guests the questions beforehand. They are pretty straightforward questions that we ask or statements that we have, but it's the different take from each person. Your favorite book, a lot of people have that at the end of their podcast. We wanted something a little bit more thought-provoking and just something a little different that could add value.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster. One absolute benefit of having your podcast is that every now and again, you're going to meet somebody that comes on your show or you go on their show and you end up doing business together. It's just a huge value. It's kind of cool because today's episode was actually recorded quite a while ago, a couple of months back. And the interesting thing is that it is with somebody who is now a client. They weren't a client when we were interviewing with them, but they came on the podcast. And then at the end of the episode, they said something like, oh, tell me more about how you do that. And I shared how we do it. And they said, all right, well, let's do business together. And so we ended up starting to work for Greg Lyons and his brother, Tim Lyons. And I'm excited to share this episode because I think they're doing so many things right. And one of my favorite parts that they do is offload and outsource and get some of the stuff that they know that they can't do as well onto somebody else's plate so they can really focus on the things that they're doing. Well, without further ado, let's jump into this episode that I had with a current client of ours. But as you'll hear, it was before we ended up working together. Let's dive in. I've known of Greg and his brother, Tim, who actually they have started a podcast, which is really cool. The route that they're going, it's unique. And we might get into that a little bit just because the business model is really interesting. In short, they are real estate investors. And many of you absolutely know that I come from a real estate investing background as well. So a lot of times, because I'm just so well connected to a lot of really cool people that do that, and there is a lot of actually real estate investing podcasts out there. We're going to have some of them on the show, but Greg and his brother, Tim, do things a little bit differently than literally anyone that you've ever heard on this show and probably anyone that you've ever heard on a different show. And so we will probably spend a little bit of time, even though this is a podcast about podcasting, it's always interesting to get into what are people's businesses? What are they doing? If you do want Greg's bio, you just scroll down. It's in the show notes already. It's already written down in the show notes and you can get a little bit more details on him, as well as their podcast is going to be found in the show notes as well. It's the Passive Income Brothers podcast because they do it together and the brothers, obviously. And they are there to help people figure out how to do passive income and to do it safely. So we'll get into a few of those things. I'm excited because as we record this, episode 2 just went live. When we're recording, it's so new to Greg that he's going to be able to share a few things, what he learned. And that's really where I want to start off. So Greg, before we get into some of those other details, I'm just curious, when I listened to, I think it was episode 1, I believe it was episode 1 of the 2 that you have launched right now, it said something like, we're excited because we've been wanting to do this for a long time. And you're not alone. I think a lot of people listening have been wanting to do a podcast for a long time. Something's putting them off. So I'm just curious, how long was that? And why did you put it off for that long?
First of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I love listening to your podcast and the content you provide. And for people like my brother and I, we started Cityside Capital in March of 2020. And when we started, we always thought about, hey, we're listening to so many different podcasts and taking in so much content. It would be really cool if we did our own podcast. Well, it took us no less than 16 months to finally launch our podcast. It took us forever because it's dragging the feet. It's so many things that you should be doing, but you just never get around to it. Now that we're doing it, now that we have a cadence, I can't believe we didn't start right away.
So now that you're starting it, it's easier than you expected? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
It's easier now that we have a little bit more experience. We do sometimes, I can't believe I'm doing a podcast, and that comes across on the recordings, but it's new to us and it's something that we wanted to do for so long. So the excitement is there. And we're really starting to find our rhythm right now with our guests, with our cadence, with each other. So it's just really a lot of fun. And when you can find something you love doing, it makes it easier.
Yeah. Why did you start a business with your brother? Like, that is my stepdad and my uncle. They started a business together. And I'm just thinking about it. Like, I've never had a business with my brother. How did you guys find that you were aligned? What made you decide to kind of do it together? And then same thing with the podcast. I'm just curious if either of you were like, I should do this on my own, before thinking like, hey, why don't we just be on the same podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. To us, we have more of the abundance mentality, and the rising tide lifts all ships. So if we kind of came together, we thought we could have more success with the different networks that we have. Raising money for multifamily deals would just be a better fit if we held each other accountable. Now, I've done many things in my life. I was a college basketball player at the University of Virginia, and all I wanted to do was be a basketball coach. So I'm actually a recovering college basketball coach these days. I coached at South Carolina and American University in Washington, D.C. When I got out of that coaching lifestyle, when we had our first child, I jumped into real estate and built 77 condos in Boise, Idaho. And I did it with my brother-in-law and father-in-law. So jumping into a business with family was nothing new to me. We built those condos, the '08 downturn hit. I have seen the underside of the real estate industry, which nobody saw coming in '08 and '09. But now with this renewed focus on multifamily and how well that's doing these days, I could think of no better partner than my brother. And that's why we joined forces.
That's cool. Where do you live?
I live in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Okay.
I've been here for about 11 years. My wife and I met at the University of Virginia, and we're raising our two kids here. And she's a wonderful real estate agent for Loring
cool.
Woodruff Real Estate here in Charlottesville.
So why in Idaho to kind of build those condos then in the first place a long time ago?
Yeah, so my father-in-law, Steve Hosac, and my brother-in-law, Ken Hosac, they're probably two of the smartest people I know. And having the opportunity to learn from them, my father-in-law has been a developer of airports and residential and subdivisions for 40 odd years. For me, it was the opportunity to learn and get that hands-on experience from two very, very smart people that I respect.
Well, were they building and selling them?
Yep, selling condos.
Okay.
And that's kind of what people were doing in the early 2000s, stuff like that. That was a path to make money.
Cool. Got it. And so you said it took about 16 months to get the podcast started. What were the main things that held you back? From the day that you wanted to have a podcast, it took 16 months. And I'm sure that our listener has gone through some challenges. And I really want to kind of bring them to light, what it was that was holding you back and kind of like, how did you overcome them?
Well, I think it was a circuitous route that our business took. Because when we first started, right around when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, we were going to go buy our own apartment buildings and operate them ourselves. Through extensive networking in the real estate industry, we settled on capital raising and giving hassle-free investment opportunities for busy professionals. But real estate syndication is taking a group of people, putting their money together and buying bigger apartment buildings. Well, we found that we had a talent for it, a knack for it, and we really enjoyed giving people passive income. So it took a while to get our business off the ground and really trying to find our focus. So once we found our focus, it made it easier for us to say, hey, what is our podcast going to be about? And how can we add value to future investors or people just learning about real estate? Because there's so many different ways to make money in real estate. It's finding the right one that works for you.
Am I hearing, and just correct me if I'm wrong, that you knew that you wanted to have a podcast, but one of the things that kind of held you back is that the business was developing on your final niche, and it was maybe like you weren't sure if the timing was going to be right to launch a podcast because you weren't sure if the business was going to be like always doing that. Is that kind of right?
Well, when you're starting off on any new business, it's websites and business cards and meeting people. So in our business, it's telling people what we do. We're not selling anything. We're offering people an opportunity because real estate generally has a marketing problem. Everyone knows about the 401k and stock market, mutual funds, but not many people know about real estate syndication and how powerful it could be for your real estate portfolio and your portfolio in general. So that took a while for us to really get our business off the ground. And when it comes to the podcast, I think that if I would have found the podcast on podcasting a lot sooner, we would have collapsed our timeframes on learning about podcasts. And I guess the kind of the fear of the unknown, the limiting beliefs of, hey, other people do podcasts really kind of permeated in our thoughts. But once we kind of get over that, we got our business settled, we're capital raisers, we're licensed, we joined a broker dealer. Once we got those things settled for basically our day job, we wanted to really, really dive into the podcast. So I guess it was more having the time to really understand what we were doing.
Okay, got it. And how about some challenges? Like anyone listening they should know that they're going to run into challenges when we're starting a podcast. Is there anything that you can point to that was harder than you expected, took longer than you expected, surprised you, held you back that you might be able to bring to light?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is scheduling. And we are a little bit unique because we have two hosts for the podcast. So aligning our schedules with our kids, my brother has 3 kids, I have 2 kids, we have families. So the scheduling took forever. If it's not on a calendar, it won't get done. So once we figured out, hey, we are blocking these dates off, now we just need to find guests. And I think it was that always say, hey, we'll do it next week. We'll find time next week. It really held us back until we finally put our foot in the ground and said, hey, this is when we're doing it. It's on the calendar.
That's really super valuable. I'm thinking about myself, and I might be the worst in the world at this. So that's certainly fair. But I remember like when I was in high school, when I finally came around saying I need to get good grades so I can go to college. And same thing with like university. I would always know like I had to do my homework. I had to like get it done, but I would put it off tomorrow. I'd put it off to next week. When you're kind of in the moment of it, you always think like that you have so much time available. And what kind of ended up being is that I was always behind the 8 ball. I was always kind of like doing it the night before that it needed to be done. So I was staying up a little bit later. I was spending a lot of extra time, and you kind of did that a little bit for the podcast where you were like, man, okay, you've got your kids, I've got my kids, I've got soccer practice, football practice, I've got gymnastics, I've got to go to the band rehearsal, I've got to take the kids to school. Hey, this kid's sick. And it was like, there was always some reason that it would just be easier to not do right now. And the main thing that made it so that you could be more effective as a partnership, especially as co-hosts of your podcast, is to time block. It sounds like there's no other option. This is already blocked out in the calendar. We always do it at this time.
And you know what's interesting about that is that now that we've started doing these time blocks, you can get your mind right? Well, you can put everything else aside. There's nothing else. There's no pickup. There's no drop off. There's nothing else. So when you know at X time in the day, I have my mind right, I'm ready to go, and I'm fired up to do it. But if you're running around doing 100 different things, it doesn't work. I'm able to take that time during that time block and enjoy what I'm doing. Enjoy spending time with the guests, with my brother, and developing a great podcast because I'm so engaged with what we're doing.
Good stuff. And I'm curious, I know that it's been a very short road so far. You're 2 episodes launched that are out on the podcast. I'm curious, first and foremost, how many episodes did you decide that you wanted to be recorded before you launched that? Was it like, oh, we got the first one done, let's get it published, and then like at some other point we'll get the second one? Or are you the opposite and got 50 episodes recorded before you ever launched the first episode? What did that look like for you guys?
Yeah, we actually have 10 episodes recorded, and we have 2 edited and kind of out in the world right now. But we have 10 episodes, and we went back and forth about how many episodes we were going to do per week. We settled on 1 per week just so we could really get our cadence together of time blocking and our availability. We hope to maybe get to a point where we're releasing 2 per week. But for right now, we found that 1 a week, we have a little runway, especially with the holidays coming up and all sorts of things. So we think that 1 a week is going to work out really well for us.
I was thinking about how you guys decided to time block and be able to record. And you just mentioned that you're doing like 1 episode a week on publishing and you got 10 ahead. But I'm curious if you have decided to time block 1 hour per week, or is it more like 5 hours per month? How do you guys decide to record? Is it on 1 day per week? Is it on 1 day per month? How are you kind of like scheduling that?
So we like to time block about 3 weeks in advance, and usually 1 day per week with a 4-hour time block. And that allows our guests to kind of pick and choose where they can fit into their schedule. Because it's not lost on us that our guests are what makes this thing go. They're entertaining, they're inspiring, and they're giving their time for us. So we like to look at 1 a week, 1 time block per week, and probably 3 weeks in advance.
When you have these 4 hours, what day and time is that, by the way, just real fast?
Well, it's all over the place because my brother is a active New York City fireman right now. He's a lieutenant in the FDNY, and his schedule is all over the place. So it could be a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. It could be all over the place. Yeah.
A lot of times it might be on the weekend or whatever, but it's like you'll block a few weeks in advance and you'll say, hey, on this one Saturday, let's go from, for example, 9 to 1. We'll open our schedule up 9 to 1. Do you ever record more than 1 episode in that time block, or is it just that you're kind of opening it up to be able to do?
Yeah, we love to funnel as many people into those time blocks as possible. So we've done as many as 3 in 1 day. And that's also, since we are new at this, it's also kind of draining because you want to give so much to each guest that comes on. So we found that after that 3rd one, we were knocked out. So we don't think we're going to schedule more than 3 in a day at this point.
Yeah.
We have to get our podcasting legs underneath us.
At the same time, it sounds like you're going back to, I can't even call it an analogy. It's just my effing life. Going back to like how I was not doing my homework until like the night before. I was always kind of like behind the 8 ball. It was always stressful. I got to be honest. It was stressful because I wasn't working ahead of time. To me, it sounds like you guys are getting through that, or you guys are avoiding that by you're actually recording more than you need. In many cases, like even you're going to time block about 4 hours once a week, any week. But additionally, during those 4 hours, it's not just for 1 episode. So it's possible that you might even have the ability to record 12 or 16 episodes in a month. And so now you've got even more time available as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we never wanted to feel like we had our backs against the wall. It always wanted to be something that when we turn the microphones on, we're going to enjoy the next hour. And it could be getting to know someone. It could be catching up with an old friend. But during that hour, we wanted to enjoy it. And it wasn't just, hey, we got to get this done as fast as humanly possible. That's the last thing we wanted to do.
Yeah. Good stuff. How about like the rest of the systems? Is there any that you could point out? In my head, I'll start thinking like more chronologically, like the order of things that need to be done. Step 1 might be, how do we get a guest on the show? How do we come up with the content or figure out the guest that we want to have on the show? Have you got any system, since you've got like 10 already recorded, have you figured out some way of finding the right people or reaching out to the right people, or even like an email template or something like that?
Yeah, I wish I could say that we had our stuff all together when it came to that. What we did was we made a list of 100 people, interesting people that we've met in the industry that have inspired us or we've learned something from that could add value. So we have that 100-person list that we're working off of right now. And it's really just a personal touch at this point. It's a text or an email, and we'll send them our Calendly link, and hopefully it works that way. As we work our way through that 100-person list, we're probably going to have a better system in place to be able to acquire guests.
I love that. So 100 people, and it's a personal touch. So you might be texting, you might be calling, you might be private messaging them or whatever. And so that seems like a really beneficial way to get people, and you were able to consciously kind of like put it all together. Who do we want, and be like intentional? And I think that that's a really good takeaway for a lot of new podcasters to think, instead of freaking out or taking anyone out there, you went ahead and you made the list, and now you're going through the list. Just out of curiosity, do you ever do episodes without a guest, or is having it just you or just your brother or just the two of you in the works? Or do you prefer and plan on maybe just doing guest interviews for the first 100-ish?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our first 2 episodes are actually just my brother and I. First one's introducing ourselves, and then the second one is really introducing the concept of passive income. There's so much to learn in real estate investing that I think as we get going, we're probably going to do a podcast on inflation, a podcast on just real estate terms in general, to kind of educate the investor base and the people listening so they have a better understanding. By the time they come to our website, by the time they hop on a phone call with us, they have an idea of what's going on and how real estate can help them with their wealth building or cash flow needs. One of the mentors of ours, Gino Barbaro, always says, education times action equals results. So if you educate yourself and you never take action, it doesn't matter. But if you're not educating yourself, you'll never be able to get into the real estate investing game or any sort of investing game. So I think we're going to go with my brother and I just doing episodes where we're just kind of educating on a topic.
Out of curiosity, you mentioned one really neat piece to like kind of systemizing and automating some of this process, whereas you'll block off the 4 hours, and then it sounds like you'll maybe input that into Calendly, like this online scheduling thing where you don't have to kind of like double book and go back and forth and lose an opportunity. They'll just kind of book it on there. So the Calendly is huge, and I am glad that you mentioned it. I'm glad that you use it. I'm wondering, just curious about if you're one of the types of hosts that send the questions in advance, if you are more loosey-goosey, like you just kind of want to let it unfold and develop organically just while you're recording, because that's making me just wonder, how do you determine what questions to ask your guest?
Yeah, so far with the guests that we've had on, we've had people that have either inspired us or helped us along the way. So with their stories, they're really interesting stories. So we kind of play off of that. My brother and I Tim and I have a great cadence where he'll ask a question, we'll get a response. I'll come up with something, get a response. So we're playing off each other nice. And that just it happened organically. We do ask each guest that we've had 3 short answer questions at the end of the podcast. It's not your favorite book or favorite podcast. It's more like concepts where we say, short answer question. People say that investing in real estate is risky. What do you say to something like that? So it's more just sparks a conversation.
Sorry, I'm cutting you off, but I'm curious because I was confused if you're saying it's the exact same 3 questions in the same order for every single person, or if you just happen to come up with 3 new questions per guest. I wasn't clear.
Yeah, it's the same 3 questions for each guest. Yeah.
Okay. So people say it's risky. What do you say to that? What are the other questions that you have?
The other 2 questions are from Robert Kiyosaki. Love him or hate him, we follow him.
Love him.
And so he's always said, savers are losers, debtors are winners. And we ask the people what they think about that. And then the third question is from Jim Rohn. And he's inspired us at Cityside Capital, and he doesn't even know it, but he's just kind of a great motivator. And he says that
he might know it. I think he passed away like a year or 2 ago.
Oh, he knows everything.
He's probably up there.
He knows everything.
So what was his question?
So his saying is, formal education will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune. And we ask people what they think about that statement.
That's cool. You know what I like about that? And I think there's some stuff that the listener who's a podcaster, whether it's about to launch or that they've had it for years, I think we can all learn something from those 3 questions. I I think it's interesting that there's part of your podcast that's unexpected, that might go anywhere. And then there's part of the podcast that people can just count on. So that's one takeaway that I got from it. Another thought that I'm having is some of these things would probably be a challenge for you to tell the listener, because the listener could think, if it's their first episode that they've ever heard, they could think that you have a hidden agenda. Well, he's only saying that real estate's not risky because he obviously has something to sell. He wants me to invest with him. And so I think it's awesome that you've taken, some people say real estate's risky. What are your thoughts on this? And letting it come from your guest and each and every guest, and it doesn't have to come to you. And I actually believe that your guests, for the most part, are probably going to agree with your thoughts anyway. They're probably going to be fairly aligned anyway, but it's positive that the listener is gaining this perspective from multiple different people, whereas you might have 10 in a row that one person says, oh, I don't feel it's risky because of this. I think that there is some risk if this happens, but I still prefer to do it. And it's going to help your listener to be able to go in that direction as well. And I love those other two questions as well. Like, they're fairly famous people. I would be surprised if our listener today has never heard of either of those people. I would think that most of them would have heard of both of them. So there's a lot of good there. And I think that there's great messaging, and there's just so much about that I think is beneficial. And it can also help your listener take action on the thing that they need to take action on. So I commend you for so much of that. I assume that it's intentional because you seem like a very intentional person, but I also just know that it just would work so well for your listener. And I hope that the podcasters who are hearing this can think of what's one or two or three questions that I might be able to ask that could support my avatar. Maybe they're not a passive investor like yours is, Greg, but whoever their avatar is, a coaching client for their life coaching business. Maybe they're a lender and they want to lend more money. Maybe there's ways of inputting 2 or 3 different questions that could really support the listener to taking action, which is really the ultimate goal. I love it.
Yeah. And, we don't give our guests the questions beforehand, the short answer questions. And they are pretty straightforward questions that we ask or statements that we have. But it's the different take from each person that sometimes gets Tim and I thinking like, wow, that was really interesting. I never thought of it like that. So we thought it was fun. It's not like, again, your favorite book. A lot of people have that at the end of their podcast. We wanted something a little bit more thought-provoking and just something a little different that could add value.
That's really cool. I love it. How about within this process, there's getting guests, there's recording. You've already talked a little bit about some of that, where Calendly helps, blocking out the time helps, making sure that you and your brother are both going to be on at the same time. How about the editing process? You've got 10 episodes to be edited. What's kind of like your route to go for getting these pieces of recording to turn into a published podcast?
It's simple. We outsource. If we were editing our own podcast, we'd still be on the intro to the first one. So you got to know your strengths. And our strengths are talking about real estate and talking with guests and just talking to people about what we do. Our strengths do not lie in anything that has to do with podcasting outside of talking. It really doesn't. And we know that, and we're comfortable with that. So outsourcing has been the best thing for us because it's going to save us time to allow us to focus on the things that move the needle for us.
Good stuff. And so who writes the show notes and titles the episode?
That's the same outsource company.
Nice.
Yep.
That's so cool.
Absolutely. It's
awesome.
A one-stop shop, and that's really what you need. And that's been just so helpful for us.
Mm-hmm. After it's published, how about like marketing? How about like getting listeners earballs to the podcast? What about like social media? Is there anything that you've systemized, or even if it's not yet systemized, but you're doing that's kind of trying to promote the growth of your podcast?
Yeah, so the company that is editing the podcast, they do cover art, and they'll send little snippets from the podcast, little audiograms, as well as links to the podcast. And we're going to send those to each of our guests so they can put it on their own social media. And so that's our plan going forward. And we're going to have the same thing on our social media to kind of get the word out. If you find the one-stop shop to do the editing, to do the audiograms, the links, the cover art, it really frees you up to just kind of get your message out and do your podcast. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I personally love the takeaway of know what your strengths are and outsource the other stuff.
Absolutely.
That sits well with me. I didn't start my podcast that way. I wasn't as smart as you. I didn't have the coaches, the mentors to help me to be able to do the podcast. So I thought back then, I don't even know if there was editing companies in these years. Like it just didn't seem like a normal thing. So I'm like,
you had the I'm a mentality. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. It happens. It becomes a time suck. And you don't get the things you need to get done.
Yeah, 100%. And so I hope that the listener avoids the mistake that I made and goes kind of like in your path. How do you know, like, if you want a podcast, there is got to be some threshold of the investment, and to know if it's worth it, to start a podcast, to pay for hosting, to pay for even editors, for example. How would we determine to know, like, if I'm sure that your way isn't the only way, you know what I mean? Like maybe we couldn't even afford it. Maybe we don't have the money to offload that. So what are the considerations in your mind that we ought to be thinking of if we should be an IMA or not do it at all because we don't have a certain amount of money, or if we should make the investment because it comes back to us? What are your thoughts on that?
Tim and I believe so wholeheartedly in what we're doing at Cityside Capital, and the Passive Income Brothers podcast is just kind of an offshoot of that. And we're making the investment because, number one, we love what we're doing, but number two, the best thing we can do to get new investors, to help people achieve financial freedom, to help them get cash flow now instead of waiting until retirement, is to get the word out. And one of the fastest growing media is podcasting. And really podcasting, with as many podcasts there are in the world right now, this is in its infancy. Mm-hmm. So we really found like we can gain some traction in the podcasting world, get the word out about Cityside Capital, because we do have a unique way of raising money. We are licensed. We do have a third-party underwriter, a third-party legal. So we do things just a little bit differently in the real estate syndication world. And our podcast is going to help get that word out.
Yeah. I love how you guys do it. I really think that it's unique, as you were stating. And I'm thinking about a podcaster who's listening, regardless whatever their business is. They might be a business coach, or I've got a couple of clients who started their podcast because they're like psychiatrists and their practices were just like too full, but they still wanted to add value to the world. So they're like, I don't want more clients, but I need a place that people can learn, even though I can't spend the time directly one-on-one. So I think there's like all sorts of people that are listening. And I'm wondering if something that you said is in your mind, if it's important or not, because I think it could go either way. And basically what you're mentioning is you have a unique proposition. You have a niche. You do something differently. If we are considering starting a podcast and we feel like we're just like everybody else, what would that mean in terms of maybe starting a podcast? Would it mean we don't have a podcast at all? Or would it mean we have to figure out that proposition? Or would it mean that it's really not that important in the whole scheme of things to have like a niche?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Tim and I really think of ourselves as average Joes. I mean, there's nothing special about us, right? But when you start a podcast and you start telling your story, everyone is unique. Everyone has a special story that will resonate with someone else. I'm a cancer survivor. I am a recovering college basketball coach. I love coaching my kids' teams. I love real estate. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. All these different things may resonate with someone else and say, hey, I want to learn more about this. And people have all sorts of great stories. That my brother's a lieutenant in the FDNY. First responders love to hear his story and how he's branched out into real estate. So from being two average Joes, our stories resonate with people. And that is why you start a podcast. That's why you get your name out there.
I'm so glad you said that. I make it a point when I do my solo episodes, I do half and half. Like I'll do 50%. Every odd numbered episode is me interviewing. Like this is an odd numbered episode. And the next episode, my even numbered episode, is going to be just me pouring into the listener. So when I do those solo episodes, I try to follow the advice that you just gave. I will mention the Jeep that I'm working on, my old 81 Jeep CJ5. I will mention my kids. I'll mention my hobbies. I'll mention mountain biking, CrossFit, whatever it is. Some of those unique things, Denver, just like you were talking about first responder and cancer survivor, there's unique things about you that people are going to be drawn to. And it's going to help humanize you and help them to be more well-connected. And back in the real estate space, I remember clearly there was somebody who decided to be a passive investor with our deals only because I made on my social media, I made a bunch of posts about mountain biking, enjoying mountain biking, trying jumps and stuff like that. And they've just basically said, I can invest with anybody. I can work with anybody. I can hire anybody, but I want to hire you because we've got that thing in common and you just seem like a good guy. And so I love that takeaway. I've seen it in my own business as well. And I think you're absolutely onto something where even if you do something the same way as other people do, like your unique proposition of your company is different than mine was. Basically, I was offering the same thing of all of the other syndicators, but that person came to me because of mountain biking. They related to it. So I think that's huge. You're going to gain that value from that.
People want to know, like, and trust you. And you can only make that connection if you tell your story. When we first met, you mentioned Denver. My wife is from Littleton, Colorado. So right away, you became human to me. I know exactly where you are and all these sort of things. Just these small connections really, really make the difference. And it's the building of a relationship that may take time. It may take years. Who knows? But you at least have that connection to start from. Mountain biking, being from the same area, cancer survivor, whatever it is. Everyone has their unique story.
I'm curious as well, when you decided to start this thought leadership platform of podcasting, did you have an end in mind? Did you say, we'll do this for 2 months, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else? Did you say, hey, we're going to do this forever? What was your thought as you were creating this platform of a minimum threshold that you needed to do before you'd ever pivot, out of curiosity?
We actually don't have any sort of goal of listenership, of how long we're going to do it. I suppose if we get 6 months, 12 months down the line and we have 3 downloads, that may be telling us a little something, right? But right now it's just, we're in the honeymoon phase. We're enjoying what we're doing. And we think that people will resonate with our story and our guest story. So I don't see an end in sight. We're just enjoying it too much. And I think that's the most important thing. We're only on this planet for so long. Our lives are only going to be this long. Do something you love doing. And right now, we love podcasting. And that's why we're going to continue to do it.
Cool. Awesome. How about let's end the episode with this one thing. What is the best advice that you would give to somebody who was an up-and-coming podcaster?
Take action. Just do it. Don't wait. It's kind of like there's no great time to have a baby, right? You don't have enough money, you don't have enough time or anything like that. The conditions are never going to be perfect, but take a step out there and make it happen. And once you do that, you're either going to love it or hate it. But if you love it and your story resonates, man, it is so much fun.
You are awesome. That resonates with me. And I'd love to invite the listener to check you out. You've got your website, which is, I think, citysidecap.com, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's in the show notes, so you don't even have to memorize that. Just scroll down. Also, the link to the podcast is in the show notes. And so feel free to follow Greg, especially if you are looking for passive income. He's an expert at doing that, and he and his brother are doing it for the right reasons. And the stops that they have in place, I think, really help passive investors protect their assets, which is, in my opinion, and others, one of the number one things you need to do if you're investing is to make sure you protect that principal. So, Greg Lyons, thank you for jumping on, and I'll let you go, brother.
Appreciate it.
You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this, and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.